This morning, jury selection began for George Zimmerman's second-degree murder trial in Florida. Zimmerman is back in court more than 15 months after he shot and killed 17-year-old Travon Martin. Joining us now to discuss this is trial attorney Richard Roth and Dr. LaRue Lewis McCoy, professor of sociology and black studies at the City University of New York. So welcome to both of you. Richard, what does jury selection in a high-profile case like this look like?
Well, it's going to be, each of both the prosecutor and the defense counsel will get essentially a resume of every one of the jurors. They will find out, their education, their prior trial experience. They'll find out if they've had any kind of run-in with the law. They'll know if they've sat as jurors before. So it'll be a full-blown investigation as to which juror is best. And let's be very clear. The prosecutors want one juror biased on one side, and the defense wants a juror biased on the other side. It's not like you're really looking for unbiased jurors, because at the end of the day, both sides want to win.
And LaRue, how can the prosecution and defense pick a jury fairly, given that type of gamemanship?
Well, I think that in the best case scenario, their interests cancel each other out, and we find jurors who are in the middle and impartial. Now, the best case scenario has nothing to do with actual jury selection. Unfortunately, I think what we also have to deal with are the demographics of the county. In particular, Seminole County in Florida is predominantly white, predominantly older, and predominantly Republican. Now, historically, this means that it would be leaning towards the prosecution, but you also have a whole racial inversion, if you will, right? You have a African-American male who was murdered. You have a defendant who is identified as Latino or white by some. And so what we're really going to have to do is it's going to be a tremendous fight, particularly for Attorney Crump, to get a sympathetic jury, because this case has been so public. It's hard for me to imagine anyone in Florida alone doesn't know about the Travon Martin case and doesn't have way too much information.
Yeah, and Richard, what are the constitutional rules surrounding voir dire, or surrounding selecting a jury? There are certain things that a prosecutor and defense attorney can't do when saying, I don't want this guy or I don't want this gal.
Yeah, I mean, the Constitution, there are very few constitutional limitations. Let's be clear. If someone is African-American, you can see it. If they're Hispanic, you can tell it. You can sort of tell their background. What you want to do is you want to see, it's an art, not a science, but you want to walk in, see what newspaper they're reading, for example. Are they reading in New York, the New York Times, the New York Post? They tend to be a Republican, Democratic, that is a liberal or conservative philosophy. You can really ask pretty much anything. What they're going to really hone in on is how much information you have about the case independent of being a juror. Because remember, the prosecutor was actually very successful in getting rid of a lot of the evidence about Travon Martin, that is prior drug use, other information about him, and a lot of that stuff has been in the press. So it's very important for both sides to make sure as best as possible to get a clean juror. Certainly for the prosecutor. So there's really no constitutional limitations as long as you're not asking something which is either defamatory or disparaging. But as the professor said, this is a very Republican, conservative, male, actually female as well. There's more females than males, but a conservative Republican county. There's fewer blacks, there's fewer Hispanics. It's not typical of any urban area. So you may have a very pro-defense jury, no matter what the prosecution wants to get.
And Professor, given those demographics, how closely will this case be monitored by the media for bias?
I think it's going to be monitored, not even just for bias, it'll be watched closely. One of the issues you have is that even with our judicial system as it is, rarely do we have juries that reflect the demographics, particularly when we're dealing with younger Latino or black folks, right? And I think one of the things to be said for this trial is as we watch, as we wait for a decision, let's really figure out how to become involved in the processes of the justice system. Paul Butler wrote a great book called Let's Get Free. And one of the concepts he has is this notion of Martin Luther jurors, right? Which are people who actually say, yes, I'll do my civic duty, but I'll do it with an eye to justice, realizing that traditionally we don't have juries that reflect the interests, the needs, or the background of folks who are black, Latino, or poor.
Well, the latest coming out is that the defense asked for continuance and the judge denied it. I have the live blog here from Huffington Post pulled up on my computer as of 12:11 p.m. There's no sound. The microphones have been shut off while the judge and attorneys go over jury questionnaires. They're going through questionnaires, things to ask the jury, things to decipher who will be good, who will be bad for each side. And ultimately, as you said, Professor, perhaps, maybe, just maybe, that those things will cancel each other out and there will be a fair trial, but we will be following it. Thank you both for joining us, LaRue especially, and Richard, stay with us. So on Saturday, police in New Orleans pulled the car of missing teacher Terralyn Monette out of a bayou. A decomposing body was found inside the car, but authorities have not yet confirmed whether it is that of Monette, who went missing on March 2nd. So, Richard, what are the next steps here? What happens?
Well, you know, the frustration with this case is that she apparently she disappeared on March 1st, I believe it was. We're now we're in the middle of June almost. So it took 3.5 months. There's a lot of very angry people there wondering why it took 3.5 months to find the car, which apparently went down from her home, from the bar on her way home. So what they're going to do now is they're going to look and see what kind of condition it's in. Apparently the body's very decomposed, but they're going to ask a lot of questions. They've learned already that she was at a bar until about 5 in the morning, and she told her friends she was going to pull on the side, off the side of the road, and was going to rest a bit. We don't know if she was drunk or if she was tired, but all we know from that point on is, in fact, that she was she went into, unfortunately, she passed away into a creek, so a river. So what they're going to do now is keep asking questions and try to piece together everything that happened over the course of that morning so they can figure out whether or not she just either was drunk or too tired and went over the bridge.
And given that length of time between her disappearance and her cars being found just recently, Monette's mother has accused the police of mishandling the case. Do you agree with this?
She has, and you know, one would think that it is odd that if you're going from a bar to home, that they should check the river in which she would normally pass. But apparently, from what I understand, there were other cars that had been picked up from that river. So we don't know yet whether they just missed a car, which is a tough thing to miss with a metal detector, or whether they picked up another half dozen cars and didn't get hers. It is somewhat bothersome, though, that the police would not pick up that car, and all of a sudden they went back to do a swipe again, and just this past weekend found it. So I am bothered by the fact that it took 3 months to find a car in a river.
Yeah, well, Richard, thank you a ton for joining us. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you very much. You too.
All right, and coming up next, a former New York Times photographer documents the Iraq War.